All right, so you know how most of us have probably played tug of war at some point, right?
Yeah.
Like out at a park or maybe even gym class back in the day.
Yeah, I remember those days. Seems like a pretty simple game, right? Just digging in and pulling.
Well, get this. That simple game, tug of war, it was actually a full-fledged Olympic event.
Really? Wow, I never knew that.
And not just like for a year or two either. It was in the games for decades. Can you believe it?
That's wild. It really makes you think about how much the Olympics have changed, right? Like what was considered a serious sport back then compared to what we see now.
Exactly. And that's actually what we're going to dive into today, all those defunct Olympic sports, the events you won't be seeing at Paris 2024. We've got a whole stack of sources, articles, even some stuff from a podcast called Stuff You Missed in History Class, all about the sports that got dropped from the games.
Sounds fascinating. I'm ready to hear about some forgotten sports history.
Oh, we've got some good ones. Controversial tug-of-war matches, events you've probably never even heard of, like
Yeah.
underwater distance diving,
Yeah.
even live pigeon shooting.
Whoa, live pigeon shooting. Okay, that one I gotta hear about. But before we jump into all the crazy stuff, maybe we should, take a step back. How does a sport even become an Olympic event in the first place? I mean, it can't just be, is it popular or not, right?
Yeah, good point. I'm sure there's a whole process to it.
Oh, absolutely. The International Olympic Committee, they have a whole set of criteria for that.
Okay, so walk me through it. What are the hurdles?
Well, for starters, the sport, it needs its own international governing body, like
Right.
totally separate from any government. And that governing body, they have to enforce all those world anti-doping rules, to keep things fair.
Right, fair play, that's huge.
Oh, yeah. And then there's how widespread the sport is globally. Like for men's sports, it has to be played in at least 75 countries and on at least 4 continents.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And for women's sports, it's a little lower, 40 countries and 3 continents.
So it's not just about how many people are playing, but where in the world they're playing it.
Precisely. But then, of course, there are also reasons why a sport might get the boot from the games.
Yeah, it's not like once you're in for life.
Right. The IOC, they're always evaluating the program, looking at things like practicality, if a sport is popular and if it aligns with those overall Olympic values.
Okay, so break that down for me. What makes a sport impractical for the Olympics?
Well, think about it, the cost of building those specialized venues. Some sports, they need really unique facilities, which can be expensive to build and then to maintain. If that venue isn't really going to get used for much else, well, it makes you think twice.
Yeah, host cities are already shelling out a ton of money for the games. I can see how venue costs would be a major factor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's media attention and whether the sport is going to attract viewers. The Olympics, they're a global event, right? The IOC, they want to make sure people are actually going to tune in, get excited.
So it's not enough for a sport to have a dedicated fan base. It has to be something that can grab the attention of a wider audience.
Exactly. Baseball is a good example, actually. It's super popular in a lot of countries, but its Olympic status, it's been kind of on again, off again. Like sometimes it's a demonstration sport, then a medal event, and they even dropped it for a while.
Really? Why they drop baseball?
Well, Major League Baseball wasn't keen on stopping their season for the games, and the IOC, they wanted the top players to participate, obviously. But it's interesting, though, because baseball is going to be back at the LA 2028 games.
Well, that makes sense. LA and baseball, they just go together.
They do. But yeah, it just shows how a sport's Olympic journey, it can be pretty unpredictable. Now, are you ready to get into those more offbeat sports we talked about, the ones that got dropped?
Absolutely. I'm all ears. Let's start with tug of war. Hard to imagine it as this intense Olympic event. It's like a kid's game.
Right. But tug of war, it actually had a pretty controversial run in the Olympics. It was in the games for 20 years, from 1900 to 1920, and there was drama right from the get-go.
Okay, I'm hooked already. Tell me more about this tug of war drama.
Well, in 1900 at the Paris Games, there was this scheduling problem, and the U.S. team, they had to pull out. So it was just a mixed Scandinavian team and a French team.
Talk about international rivalry.
Oh, yeah. And the Scandinavian team, they ended up taking gold, but there were, conflicting reports about whether the U.S. team actually had an unofficial match after, and some U.S. newspapers even claimed they won.
They just couldn't let it go, huh?
Apparently not. And there were even rumors of a brawl between the teams. Tug of war getting violent.
Wow, it sounds like tug of war was pretty heated, even from its Olympic debut.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And there's another crazy thing about the 1900 competition. One of the guys on that mixed Scandinavian team, Edgar Aby, He was actually a journalist covering the games.
Wait, what?
Yeah. He wasn't even supposed to be competing, but they needed another guy, so he stepped in and ended up winning a gold medal.
Can you imagine a journalist just suddenly becoming an Olympic champ today? That would be a wild headline.
Oh, absolutely. But the tug-of-war craziness, it didn't stop there. The 1904 St. Louis Games, things got even wilder.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What happened in St. Louis?
Well, first of all, the 1904 Games, they were part of the St. Louis World's Fair, which caused all sorts of, confusion. Some athletes didn't even realize they were competing in the Olympics.
They're kidding.
Nope. It was a whole mess. And then the tug-of-war event itself, well, that's where things got a little scandalous.
Oh, I knew it.
The U.S. had 4 teams competing, and one of them, supposedly from the Milwaukee Athletic Club, they were accused of using ringers, bringing in guys from another club in Chicago.
Oh, wow. Trying to sneak in their secret weapons?
Exactly. The New York Athletic Club, they were so furious. They refused to play their final matches, basically forfeited.
So they boycotted their own matches. That's pretty intense.
It really shows how seriously they took, the integrity of the competition. But even with all the controversy, that Milwaukee team, the one accused of cheating, they still took home the gold.
So they got away with it, basically.
It seems that way. It definitely adds another layer to the whole tug-of-war story.
For sure. So, any more tug-of-war drama we should know about?
Oh, there's more. In 1908, at the London Games, it wasn't ringers that caused the problem. It was, wait for it,
Shoes.
shoes. Seriously?
I know, right? It sounds ridiculous. But during the quarterfinals, the U.S. team, they got defeated pretty badly by a team from Liverpool. And afterwards, the Americans, they started complaining, saying the British team's shoes gave them an unfair advantage.
Hold on. What kind of shoes were they wearing?
They were wearing their police boots?
They were competing in their work boots.
That's wild.
Apparently. And there was this rule that you couldn't wear shoes with, projecting nails, tips, springs, points, hollows, or projections of any kind.
Okay, that makes sense. No cleats allowed.
Right. The Americans, they thought the British boots, they might have had, hidden spikes or something to help them dig into the ground.
So were they right? Were the British cheating?
Well, it seems like the boots were just standard police issue, with that heel plate to prevent wear and tear. But the Americans, they were so convinced that something was up that the Liverpool team actually offered to have a rematch barefoot.
Barefoot. Wow. Talk about being confident in your skills.
Right. They're basically like, we'll beat you with or without shoes.
So did the Americans take them up on it?
Nope, they refused. And in the end, the British teams ended up taking all the medals. They had 3 teams in the event.
Wow. So tug-of-war, it was just plagued by controversy from start to finish.
Pretty much. You'd think after a while they'd have figured out, stricter rules to avoid all the drama.
I know, right? But hey, at least it makes for a good story.
It definitely does. So after all that, did tug-of-war at least make it past the 1920 games?
Don't leave me hanging.
Sadly, no. It had one last appearance in the 1920 games. Pretty uneventful, actually. But then, poof, it was gone.
Wow, what a roller coaster ride tug-of-war's Olympic history was.
Definitely entertaining. And even though it's not an Olympic sport anymore, tug-of-war is still popular in some parts of the world. There's even an international tug-of-war federation with, over 50 member countries.
So they're keeping the dream alive.
Exactly. And they're actually trying to get it back in the game. So maybe one day we'll see Olympic tug-of-war again.
Oh, after hearing about all that history, I'd say they deserve another shot. But hey, for now, let's move on from tug-of-war to some of those other unusual Olympic events, those one-hit wonders that only lasted a single games.
Oh, yeah, those are some good ones. Get ready for obstacle course swimming, croquet, underwater distance diving, and even live pigeon shooting.
Live pigeon shooting. You're not serious, right?
I wish I was kidding, but that's a story for another time. First, let's dive into the world of obstacle course swimming. Sounds like something straight out of one of those adventure reality shows, right?
It does. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me all about it.
Well, this event, it was only held once back in the 1900 Paris Games, and it involved, you guessed it, swimming, but with a twist.
A twist? Like what?
So it was a 200-meter swim in the Seine River, but they had to navigate 3 obstacles along the way.
The Seine River. That sounds challenging, to say the least.
Oh, I'm sure it was. And the obstacles, well, first they had to climb over a pole, right above the water, then climb over a row of boats, and finally swim under another row of boats.
You're kidding. All that before finally making it to the finish line.
Yep. It was a real test of endurance and, I'd imagine, patience. And get this, it was a freestyle event, meaning they could use any stroke they wanted.
Oh, wow. So they really had to think strategically about which stroke would work best for each obstacle, right? And deal with the river currents on top of that.
Exactly. A lot to think about while trying not to drown. Out of the 28 swimmers who signed up, only 12 actually competed.
Probably saw that course and said, nope, not for me.
I don't blame them. Sounds like a lot to handle.
So who ended up winning this crazy race?
An Australian swimmer named Frederick Lane. He actually won another gold medal in the 200-meter freestyle, the regular one, so clearly he knew his way around the water.
Double gold medalist. Wow, those obstacles didn't slow him down much.
Not at all. But as wild as obstacle course swimming sounds, I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that, they had croquet in the Olympics. Croquet, it's like the ultimate chill backyard game.
I know, right? Hardly seems like it belongs in the Olympics.
It really doesn't. But it was a medaled event, believe it or not. Just once, though, back in 1900. And it was a bit of a flop, if we're being honest.
Okay, I got to hear this. What happened with Olympic croquet?
Well, for one thing, nobody really cared. Some sources say that only one person bought a ticket to watch the entire competition. And even the press, they barely covered it. I guess croquet just wasn't that exciting back then either.
One fan. That's harsh. So who were these croquet champions that everyone forgot about?
Well, it was only open to French athletes, so not exactly a global showdown. Gaston Amat, he won gold in the one-ball singles and the doubles with Georges Georgouin. And then Christian Waidelich, he pretty much dominated the two-ball singles.
So no international rivalries or nail-biting finishes for Olympic croquet, just like a casual French garden party.
Pretty much. But
Yeah.
there's one interesting thing. The 1900 croquet events, they had some of the first women Olympians. Jean-Philippe Brohy, Marie Onnier, and Madame Desprez. They all competed against the men in both the singles events.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So even in this totally overlooked event, they're making history?
Absolutely. Trailblazers for sure.
Okay, but as strange as croquet in the Olympics is, I'm still hung up on that plunge for distance thing. Underwater distance diving. How does that even work?
It's as weird as it sounds. This event, it was also only in the 1904 games, and it was basically like a contest to see who could glide the farthest underwater without moving their arms or legs.
So they were basically human torpedoes. Did they at least have, special suits or anything?
Nope, just regular swimsuits. They'd dive into a lake from a platform and just try and stay underwater as long as they could, letting their momentum carry them. They measured their distance from where they entered the water to wherever their head popped up.
So it was all about being streamlined and holding your breath for a really long time.
Exactly, like ultimate breath-holding champions. The 1904 competition, it was held in this man-made lake called Life Saving Lake, and all 5 competitors were from the New York Athletic Club.
Wait, only 5 competitors? And all from the same club? That's hardly a global competition.
I know, right? It seems this plunge for distance thing, it wasn't exactly catching on. The winner, William Dickey, he had a pretty impressive plunge, though, 62 feet 6 inches.
Wow, that is pretty impressive. But I guess it wasn't enough to make it a lasting Olympic event. Watching people glide underwater for a few seconds, it probably wasn't the most thrilling spectator sport.
You got that right. But hey, as much as I want to keep talking about all these quirky events, we got to address the big one, live pigeon shooting.
Yeah, that one. It's hard to even imagine something so, brutal being part of the Olympics.
Definitely a dark chapter in Olympic history. Thankfully, one that was very short-lived. It's hard to fathom, right, in this day and age, but back in 1900, yeah, shooting live pigeons, that was an Olympic sport.
It's so jarring, isn't it? To think about that happening at the Olympics, it feels so wrong, so against the whole idea of the games.
Yeah, it definitely goes against our modern ideas of, sportsmanship and all that. But you gotta remember, back then, the Olympics, they were still kind of figuring things out. The program was a lot more experimental, you could say.
Experimental is one way to put it.
Ooh.
Okay, so let's break down this event. How did it even work?
Well, it was pretty much what it sounds like. They'd release these pigeons from traps, and the shooters, they'd try to, shoot as many as they could. They got 1 shot per bird, and if they missed twice, that was it. They were out.
It's just, it's awful to think about all those birds,
Yeah, it's a pretty grim part of Olympic history. But the good news is it caused a huge uproar. Animal welfare groups, the public, everyone was outraged. And the IOC, they got the message loud and clear. They never let it happen again.
Well, that's a relief. Makes you appreciate how far we've come, in terms
Yeah.
of animal rights and all that.
For sure. It really highlights how our values change over time, What was considered normal back then is just unthinkable now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on from, well, let's go back to those other one-time Olympic events we talked about. How about that 200-meter obstacle course swimming race?
Ooh, that one. It sounds more like something you'd see in like a modern adventure race than the Olympics.
Right. Swimming, but with obstacles. And to make things even crazier, they did it in the Sand River.
Can you imagine the currents, the conditions? Must have been wild.
I'm picturing just total chaos. Swimmers bumping into each other, trying to climb over things. So what were the obstacles exactly?
All right, so first there was a pole they had to climb over, then over a row of boats, and then get this, under another row of boats, and then finally to the finish line.
Wow. That's like a full-body workout, not just swimming. They had to be strong, agile.
Oh, yeah. And don't forget, it was freestyle, so any stroke they wanted.
I bet choosing the right stroke was key, depending on the obstacle and the partner.
Sure, lots of strategy involved.
So who won this chaotic race?
Frederick Lane, an Australian swimmer, he actually won another gold in the regular 200-meter freestyle, so the guy was clearly a beast in the water.
Well, a double gold medalist. It
Yeah.
must have been something else. It'd be cool to see that event, like, brought back today, maybe as part of one of those adventure races, or even just like an exhibition at the Olympics.
I think people would love it. It's got that, that mix of athleticism, the craziness, the unpredictability.
Totally. But let's move on from obstacle course swimming for now. How about another defunct sport? One that's a little more, well, how should I put it? Refined.
Ah, you're talking about croquet, right? The sport that's more at home in a garden party than the Olympics.
That's the one.
Yep.
It's kind of funny, but also kind of baffling that croquet was ever considered an Olympic sport. It just doesn't seem to fit.
Yeah, it's definitely an odd one out. But it was a medaled event at the Paris Games in 1900. But like we said before, it didn't exactly make a big splash. It was kind of a flop.
Okay, remind me why Olympic croquet was such a dud.
Well, mainly because nobody cared. Seriously, some reports say there was only one paying spectator for the whole competition. Even the press, they pretty much ignored it. Seems like croquet just wasn't a crowd pleaser back then either.
One lonely fan. That's got to be some kind of Olympic record.
It might be. I guess croquet was just too niche, too, how should I put it, low-key for the Olympics.
Yeah, it didn't have that drama, the intensity, the global appeal that people want from the Olympics.
Right. And the competition itself, well, it wasn't exactly fierce either. For some reason, only French athletes could compete.
So no international rivalries, no close calls for the gold.
Nope. Just some French players showing off their croquet skills. Gaston Oma, he took the gold in the one-ball singles and the doubles with his partner, Georges Norin. And then Kretian Waidelich, he was the champ in the two-ball singles.
The French sweep of the croquet medals. Not
Snap.
surprising, I guess, given the lack of competition.
Exactly. But there is one cool thing about Olympic croquet. It actually featured some of the first women to ever compete in the games. Jeanne-Phil Brohy, Marie Onier, and Madame Desprez. They all played against the men in the singles events.
That's pretty awesome. Even though the event itself was a bit of a bust, they were still breaking barriers.
Totally. Pioneers in their own right. Okay, so remember that plunge for distance we talked about? Underwater distance diving?
Oh, yeah, that one. How does that even work? Did they have special gear or techniques back then?
Nope, not really. It was all about being streamlined and holding your breath. They'd dive in from a platform and just glide, trying to go as far as they could without using their arms or legs.
So it was like a test of how efficiently they could move through the water using just their momentum.
Exactly. The goal was to minimize drag and go the distance. And they measured it from where they dove in to where their head broke the surface.
Sounds like it took some serious lung capacity. So where'd they hold this underwater gliding contest?
The 1904 competition, which, by the way, was the only time it was in the Olympics, was held in this man-made lake called Life Saving Lake in St. Louis.
Of course it was in St. Louis. That's where they had all the unusual events.
They did, and all 5 competitors, would you believe it, were from the same club, the New York Athletic Club.
Another small field of competitors. I guess these less popular sports had trouble attracting people from around the world.
Yeah, it seems that way. Anyway, William Dickey, he ended up winning with a plunge of 62 feet and 6 inches.
Wow, that's actually pretty impressive. But I guess it wasn't enough to make it a lasting Olympic event. Probably wasn't the most exciting thing to watch.
Probably not. But, it's fascinating to look back and see what was once considered an Olympic-worthy sport. Some of them were pretty innovative, like that obstacle course swimming. And then there were others, like the pigeon shooting, that we're glad are gone.
It just shows how much the Olympics, reflect our values and priorities as a society. What was acceptable back then is totally different now.
Right. Speaking of changes, we got to mention some of the newer sports that have joined the Olympics, like breakdancing and skateboarding.
Oh, yeah, those are definitely shaking things up. Breakdancing, or breaking as they call it, that was in Tokyo 2020, added a whole new vibe to the games.
Definitely. It's cool to see, like, street culture and urban sports getting recognition on such a big stage.
Totally. And skateboarding, that was also in Tokyo, and it's going to be in Paris 2024, too. Do you think these newer sports will, stick around? Or will they end up joining the ranks of the defunct someday?
It's tough to say. Only time will tell if they have that staying power. But the fact that they're in the games now, it just shows how the Olympics are always evolving, trying to reflect what's happening in sport and culture.
It's amazing to see how the games change over time, what stays, what goes, what's new.
Yeah, it really reflects how, like, dynamic sport and culture are always evolving.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've uncovered some pretty interesting stuff today, digging into those defunct Olympic events.
We've gone from tug-of-war drama to underwater distance diving, and even that pigeon shooting event, which is just wow.
Yeah, definitely some wild stuff. And we even touched on those newer sports, breakdancing and skateboarding, that are kind of shaking things up in the modern games.
It's been a real journey through those forgotten sports, the controversial ones, and even the ones that were like way ahead of their time.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of those sports that got dropped from the Olympics, we want to leave you with something to think about.
A little food for thought.
Right, exactly. If you had the power, what defunct Olympic sport would you bring back, and why?
Would you go for like the crazy obstacle course swimming, or maybe the more laid back croquet, or how about the just plain weird plunge for distance?
Let us know. Hit us up on social media. Tell us what you'd choose and why.
We love hearing from you guys and getting those conversations going.
And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the sometimes bizarre, sometimes fascinating world of those defunct Olympic sports, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes.
We're always digging into something new and interesting, and we love sharing those aha moments with you all.
So till next time, stay curious, keep those questions coming.
And we'll be back soon with another deep dive, ready to explore a whole new topic.